Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. The theme of today's show comes from a book by Shiva Naipaul, Journey to Nowhere, a New World Tragedy, which is about Jim Jones and the massacre at Jonestown. But Shiva Naipaul, the brother of V.S. Naipaul, they're both from Trinidad. He went to Guyana, he went to Trinidad, and then he went to Northern California in order to try to understand the world that molded Jim Jones. And while he was in Trinidad, he visited a vocational school and wrote, "I looked at the broken tractor, the burned out cucumber bush, the fallow field, the dying chicken. I thought of the essays I had been given to read, the broken grammar, the fractured, nebulous prose that almost seemed to hint at a kind of universal mental retardation." And I've had the feeling for several years that this is the world we live in, not just in Trinidad or Northern California, but everywhere in the West. A world of universal mental retardation. Let me give you an example. This is from Good Morning America. Texas Southern University is honoring the memory of George Floyd by providing a full scholarship to his 6-year-old daughter, Gianna. TSU announced the offer Tuesday on its website as thousands of mourners, family, and friends gathered in Houston, where Floyd grew up, to lay him to rest. This board is committed to education and understands that a college degree is one of many powerful steps toward a productive and successful life, said Albert H. Myers, chair of the Board of Regents. We know that this gesture cannot take the place of her dad's loving presence, but we hope that it will contribute to easing her journey through life. Floyd was born in North Carolina, though he lived most of his life in Houston, where he graduated from Jack Yates High School near TSU. Now, first of all, let's see. In a recent interview with Good Morning America, Gianna Floyd said she wants people to know I miss him. Her mother, Roxy Washington, told GMA Floyd just wanted Gianna to have the best. What was he doing in Minneapolis then? One wonders. Yes, but that is not the first question that comes to mind. How can a 6-year-old be given a university scholarship? This is absolutely preposterous. Is TSU going to announce on her 8th birthday that she has already been promoted to professor, and perhaps on her 10th birthday that she has been appointed dean of the Department of George Floyd Studies? I certainly wouldn't be surprised. In more universal mental retardation news, yes, Rick Wilson. Rick Wilson is described as a Republican strategist whose brain broke when Donald Trump was, when he won the Republican nomination for president in 2016. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Neocon never Trumper Rick Wilson was humiliated after he attempted to politicize a thank you tweet sent by Domino's Pizza to White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, apparently not realizing that the tweet was 8 years old. Wilson, who is billed as a Republican strategist yet constantly amplifies left-wing rhetoric, was responding to an exchange between McEnany and Domino's in which McEnany tweeted, "Fun fact, Domino's is way better than any New York City pizza." Domino's responded, "That's one heck of a compliment. Thanks for the love. Hashtag we appreciate it." This prompted Wilson to wade in and attempt to politicize the interaction by tweeting at Domino's, "You just killed your brand." Domino's, to its credit, did not cuck. And they tweeted back, "Welp, it's unfortunate that thanking a customer for a compliment back in 2012 would be viewed as political. Guess that's 2020 for ya." Watson continues, even if the exchange had taken place in 2020, Wilson's attempt to politicize it would still have been cringe, but the fact that it happened 8 years ago only emphasizes what a hyper-partisan hack he is. This isn't the first major gaffe Wilson committed in his ongoing Twitter war with the president, reports Newsbusters. Wilson made a sorry attempt to play gotcha over the coronavirus-induced market dip March 9th by sharing a tweet the same day that appeared to be from Trump in 2015. The tweet he shared called for the punishment of a sitting president if the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell more than 1,000 points in a single day. Wilson commented, "I agree, Mr. President. The problem," Wilson agreed with a fact-checked fake tweet. Now, I was looking at the Twitter feeds for Rick Wilson and for Domino's, and they are full of hundreds of people saying that they will never eat Domino's pizza again. Kayleigh McEnany was in grad school when she tweeted this out. Caleb Hull tweets, "The funniest thing about Rick Wilson and his wife is that they not only went out of the way to buy a Confederate cooler, but then they were so proud of it that they posted pictures of it on Instagram." Then a correction, looks like it was their son's cooler that his girlfriend painted that they both posted a picture of on Instagram, but still. And someone else says that wasn't a store-bought cooler, that was handmade. It's one thing to buy something, it's a whole nother to hand make it. That takes thought, planning, and execution. And apparently these were fairly recent pictures on Instagram. Not that I give a toss, but if everyone is going to be set on fire for ever having said the supposedly wrong thing or done supposedly the wrong thing, like liking the novel Lolita, well, it's good that, that this is truly democratic, that everyone gets it. As it turns out, Donald Trump did a Domino's pizza ad in 2005. And before that, in 2000, he did an ad for Domino's competitor, Pizza Hut. So I guess you can strike off Pizza Hut as well. Kayleigh McEnany tweeted in response that she loves Domino's and Pizza Hut. Here's a typical comment. If taking a compliment from a person who blatantly lies to the public on a daily basis is political, well, I guess it is political. If Hermann Goebbels liked your pizza, would you tweet him back? Someone called Ken Rogers, he's a Manchester United fan. He served in the U.S. Army from 1969 to 1970, or in the U.S. Air Force from 1971 to 1993. He responded, "One heck of a compliment coming from a racist by Domino's." B-Y-E, not B-U-Y. To which my response was, "Were you dropped on your head as a child?" Did people who tweet on Twitter and are, proved to be stupid or idiots, very rarely do you get any kind of contrition from them. They seem to be proud, I suppose, just of the sentiment itself. And this leads me to an essay in the Tablet from Isabella Tarborovsky, published yesterday, called "The American-Soviet Mentality." Russians are fond of quoting Sergei Dovlatov, a dissident Soviet writer who emigrated to the United States in 1979, quote, "We continuously curse Comrade Stalin, and naturally with good reason, and yet I want to ask who wrote 4 million denunciations? It wasn't the fearsome heads of Soviet secret police who did that. It was ordinary people." Collective demonizations of prominent cultural figures were an integral part of the Soviet culture of denunciation that pervaded every workplace and apartment building. Perhaps the most famous such episode began on October 23rd, 1958, when the Nobel Committee informed Soviet writer Boris Pasternak that he'd been selected for the Nobel Prize in Literature and plunged the writer's life into living hell. Ever since Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago had been first published the previous year in Italy, since the writer could not publish it at home, the Communist Party and the Soviet literary establishment had their knives out for him. To the establishment, the Nobel Prize added insult to grave injury. It began with a condemnation, a unanimous condemnation, in the Literary Gazette. And as the author explains, then it moved downwards to the level of collective farms. Now, of course, the book had not been published in the Soviet Union, and one would guess that the number of people in the Soviet Union who had actually read it was no more than a couple hundred. It was during that campaign that the Soviet catchphrase "Ne chital, no ujushdаю," didn't read but disapprove, was born. Pasternak's accusers had coined it to protect themselves against suspicions of having come in contact with seditious material. Days after accepting the Nobel Prize, Pasternak was forced to decline it. Yet demonization continued unabated. Some of the greatest names in Soviet culture became targets of collective condemnations: composers Dmitry Shostakovich and Sergei Prokofiev, writers Anna Akhmatova and Josip Brodsky, and many others. Bouts of hounding could go on for months and years, destroying people's lives, health, and undoubtedly the ability to create. I'm reminded that a term, former persons, was invented by the Stalinists in the 1930s. Factories, universities, schools, and research institutes were all suitable venues for collectively raking over the coals a hapless, ideologically ungrounded colleague who, say, failed to show up for the voluntary, obligatory, as the Soviet cliche went, Saturday cleanups at a local park, or a student who wanted to emigrate. Twitter has been used as a platform for exercises in unanimous condemnation for as long as it has existed. Countless careers and lives have been ruined as outraged mobs have descended on people whose social media gaffes or old teenage behavior were held up to public scorn and judged to be deplorable and unforgivable. But it wasn't until the past couple of weeks that the similarity of our current culture with the Soviet practice of collective hounding presented itself to me with such stark clarity. Perhaps it was the specific professions and the cultural institutions involved, and the specific acts of writers banding together to abuse and cancel their colleagues that brought that sordid history back. On June the 3rd, the New York Times published an opinion piece that much of its progressive staff found offensive and dangerous. The author, Republican Senator Tom Cotton, had called to send in the military to curb the violence and looting that accompanied the nationwide protests against the killing of George Floyd. The targets of their unanimous condemnation, which was gleefully joined by the Twitter proletariat, which took pleasure in helping the once august newspaper shred itself to pieces in public, were New York Times opinion section editor James Bennett, who had ultimate authority for publishing the piece, though he hadn't supervised its editing, and op-ed staff editor and writer Barry Weiss, a former Tablet staffer. Weiss had nothing to do with editing or publishing the piece, but she posted a Twitter thread characterizing the internal turmoil at the Times as a civil war between the mostly young wokes, who call themselves liberals and progressives, and the mostly 40-plus liberals who adhere to the principles of civil libertarianism. She attributed the behavior of the wokes to their safetyism worldview, in which the right of people to feel emotionally and psychologically safe trumps what were previously considered core liberal values, like free speech. It was just one journalist's opinion, but it was intolerable to the collective. Although she did not name anyone in either camp, her younger colleagues felt collectively attacked and slandered. They lashed out. As the mob's fury kicked into high gear, the language of collective outrage grew increasingly strident, even violent. Goldie Taylor, writer and editor-at-large at the Daily Beast, queried in a since-deleted tweet why Weiss still got her teeth. With heads rolling at the Times, James Bennett resigned and deputy editorial page editor James Dow was reassigned to the newsroom. One member of the staff asked for Weiss to be fired for having badmouthed her younger newsroom colleagues. and insulted, quote, all of our foreign correspondents who have actually reported from civil wars, unquote. It was unclear how she did that, other than having used the phrase civil war as a metaphor. Now, I previously would have thought that despite my detestation of their political views, that the staffers at the New York Times were intelligent. But after reading this business about completely misunderstanding the use of the phrase civil war, I'm now beginning to suspect that a great number of them are stupid. Let's see, Mehdi Hassan, a columnist with The Intercept, suggested that to defend Weiss would make one a bad anti-racist, a threat based on a deeply manipulated interpretation of Weiss's post. And he has 880,000 Twitter followers. I think I've heard of this person. The Intercept isn't a particularly popular publication. Maybe I should run that test to see how many of his followers are actually real. Now, the author continues, all of us who came out of the Soviet system bear scars of the practice of unanimous condemnation, whether we ourselves had been targets or participants in it or not. It is partly why Soviet immigrants are often so averse to any expressions of collectivism. We have seen its ugliest expressions in our own lives and our friends' and families' lives. And in a collectivist culture, she writes, one hopeful result of group condemnations is control, both over the target of abuse and the broader society. When sufficiently broad levels of society realize that the price of nonconformity is being publicly humiliated, expelled from the community of people of goodwill, another Soviet cliche, and cut off from sources of income, the powers that be need to work less hard to enforce the rules. I would say that this condition of which she speaks kicked in Canada 10 or 15 years ago. It had become clear in this country that any journalist who uttered an opinion that was could be construed as anti-progressive would be ruined, would no longer have a job. Even someone as popular as Don Cherry, the former coach and hockey commentator. And so, if you look at the Canadian media, you will see the same opinions expressed over and over again. And this has a strange effect on the journalists themselves, because they read very little outside of their own publications and similar. They manage to convince themselves that all Canadians believe in what they believe. For the regular people, those outside prestigious cultural institutions, participation in local versions of collective hounding was not without its benefits either. It could be an opportunity to eliminate a personal enemy or someone who was more successful and perhaps occupied a position you craved. You could join in condemning a neighbor at your cramped communal flat, calculating that once she was gone, you could add some precious extra square meters for your living space. The mobs that perform the unanimous condemnation rituals of today do not follow orders from above, but that does not diminish their power to exert pressure on those under their influence. Those of us who came out of the collectivist Soviet culture understand these dynamics instinctively. You invoke the didn't read but disapprove mantra, not only to protect yourself from suspicions about your reading choices, but also to communicate an eagerness to be part of the collective, no matter how destructive action was next on the collective's agenda. You preemptively surrendered your personal agency in order to be in unison with the group, and this is understandable in a way. Merging with the crowd feels much better than standing alone. Americans have discovered the way in which fear of collective disapproval breeds self-censorship and silence, which impoverish public life and creative work. The double life one ends up leading, one where there is a growing gap between one's public and private selves, eventually begins to feel oppressive. For a significant portion of Soviet intelligentsia, artists, doctors, scientists, the burden of leading this double life played an important role in their deciding to emigrate. Well, I would say that most people, if you say things often enough, you typically internalize them. People typically cannot live with that level of contradiction. So you either You embrace the ethos, or you quit your job, or you go insane. Those are the three options. And the writer concludes, from my vantage point, this cultural moment in these United States feels incredibly precarious. The practice of collective condemnation feels like an assertion of a culture that ultimately tramples on the individual and creates an oppressive society. Whether that society looks like Soviet Russia or Orwell's 1984 or Castro's Cuba or today's China or something uniquely 21st century American, the failure of institutions and individuals to stand up to mob rule is no longer an option we can afford. Well, you can't put a price on dignity, though. That people will tell themselves, well, I mean, it's not that bad. All we have to do is keep our mouths shut and nod vigorously and perhaps issue vocables and clap if that's not offensive to people, the clapping. But you still get to have a job and you still get to eat, you still get to have a place to live. It is really remarkable how degraded people can be. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Caesarism, or what James Burnham in his book, The Machiavellians, called Bonapartism. Julius Caesar, I suppose, seen as a turning point in Roman history because he became a dictator. And this was, the Romans had seen dictators before, like Sulla, but supposedly they had moved beyond that. And Caesarism, his nephew, Augustus, became the first true emperor. But it all began with Caesar crossing the Rubicon. James Burnham writes, when we keep in mind the connection between Bonapartism and the formula of democracy as government by the people, we should not be surprised by what might seem otherwise to be a paradoxical political phenomenon: the rapidly growing number of individuals in this country who may properly be called democratic totalitarians. Keep in mind that this book was published in, I believe, 1943. Pathological newspapers like New York's PM, frustrated poets like Archibald MacLeish, choleric bureaucrats like Harold Ikes, gutter columnists like Walter Winchell trying to crawl out of the gutter, guilt-ridden bankers' sons like Corliss Lamont, authors like Walter Millis trying to lead the public to forget that once they thought there was something to be said against war, ambitious detective story writers like Rex Stout, ministers enjoying the platforms that they get from fellow traveling with the Communist Party. These people are, as we can readily discover from their speeches and articles and books, the most extreme Democrats in the country and quite possibly in the world. In the name of their democracy, they preach the attitudes of Bonapartism, and they advocate the suppression of the specific institutions and the specific rights and freedoms that still protect the individual from the advance of the unbridled state. Huey Long, famous for saying every man a king, was governor of Louisiana. And he was a hugely popular figure before he was assassinated in circumstances that remain mysterious. Huey Long knew much more about politics than these persons will ever know. When he said that if fascism destroys democracy in this country, it will do so in the name of democracy, he was correctly predicting the role that the democratic totalitarians are today playing. His opinion, expanded into the language we have been using, may be put as follows. The Bonapartist development of the democratic formula of self-government will be used in the attempt to destroy those concrete individual and social rights which were once also associated with the idea of democracy. It should not be imagined that this phenomenon is confined to the United States. Some people have the naive opinion that in other countries despotism was established in the name of despotism, that dictators who in the process of destroying freedom made clear to the people that they were doing just that. Naturally, it never happens that way. The modern despotisms have marched all to the tune of the workers or the people. The Stalinist Constitution of 1936 is, we are assured, the most democratic in the world. Nazism expresses, according to its own account, the aspirations and highest freedom of the entire German people. And indeed, when Europe begins to get conquered by Germany, of all European peoples, and it would doubtless do the same for the peoples of the whole world if Nazi arms should be fully successful. Honest men have never been able to get an exclusive patent, the words of democracy. Burnham believed in his book, The Machiavellians, expresses this belief at length, that democracy was an unsustainable system, that it leads to the iron law of oligarchy, or it's controlled by the iron law of oligarchy. That is to say, what is supposedly democratic leads to government at the behest of elites. And these elites, especially as Sorel noted, since violence has become a monopoly of the state, these elites become ineluctably corrupt. And eventually this leads to decadence and the rise of a strong man. Now we see on the left, there's no question that the leftists are all Bonapartists. They do not believe in the validity of other people's opinions, differing opinions. They do not believe that people who hold differing opinions should be able to speak. They do not believe that they should even be able to enjoy life, even if they decide to retire from the field of political opinions. But Donald Trump is a Bonapartist figure. American politics has been trending in this, as Burnham points out, for a long time, but we see with recent presidents the use of executive orders to make decisions rather than going through Congress. Now, Donald Trump has used many executive orders, and his supporters, of which I am one, have been pleased by the result. But let's make no mistake about this, that representative democracy, led by a man, be he president or prime minister, who is supposed to be, his power is supposed to be constrained by a constitution or Congress or other means. This representative democracy is disappearing. This is from the Daily Mail. Trump orders chokehold ban except when officers' lives are at risk and sets up bad cops register, but insists there are only tiny numbers of bad police. Now, to the extent that people on the left are able to give Trump any credit for this, they're going to be quite pleased about it. People on the right, some of them are going to be pleased because, well, Trump had to do something. And there are other people on the right who are very angry about this, and they're angry with good reason, because it is not the role of the President of the United States to regulate every policeman in America. But of course, the Department of Justice decided some years ago that it was in their purview to essentially take over entire police departments under what is known as consent decrees. Let's see, the order will ban chokeholds, as previously mentioned, and create a database of bad actor police. The president's remarks sharing details of the order came after he met with families whose loved ones fell victim to police brutality. Among those the president met included Ahmaud Arbery's family. You remember him, he's the jogger who got limited. But none of those he met with were photographed with him in the Rose Garden. A new program in the order requires, in certain situations, that social workers respond to the scene alongside police officers. The order comes 3 weeks after nationwide protests and riots over the death of George Floyd and rising tensions between Black people and cops. Trump asserted that there will be no more looting or riots, and asserted there would be a, quote, grave penalty, unquote, for those caught. But the speech also did not name any of the victims of police violence in recent weeks, particularly Floyd. You see this Stalinist impulse that you were supposed to recite a long list of names, preferably, at least 10, in order to show that you truly understand this crisis. And Trump, he didn't read the list of names, so I suppose he's not sincere. Oh, and I'm looking at a picture of Mitch McConnell here, and he is outside in the Rose Garden. Despite the fact that he is outside, he is wearing a mouth diaper, amusingly enough. And I was wondering why Mitch McConnell would be wearing a mouth diaper in public, and then I remembered that his wife is Chinese. I think that explains it. So Donald Trump he's moved against police brutality. He is preaching the virtues of de-escalation. Look, the practical effect of this is easy to see. That police are going to pull back even further from attempting to maintain order in black neighborhoods, or black people in white neighborhoods will essentially be given license to do whatever they like, as long as they like to do it, because police officers know now that in any altercation with a black man in which they are accused of some form of racism, it means they will lose their job. It means they will be disgraced. They will be run out of town, like Darren Wilson, the officer who quite justly killed Michael Brown. So this is going to lead to a further increase in lawlessness, but something must be done. That is, I suppose that's one of the primary motivating factors in our society. And we saw that with COVID-19. Something must be done. Now, as leading experts have admitted many times since then, there wasn't very much data. Much of the data was rubbish. And they didn't know very much about the virus. But nevertheless, they demanded that something be done. And what that was crippling the economy, destroying society, and suppressing civil liberties. Yeah, let's go to the chat. See what's happening there. Okay, we'll start from the top. Contra says, I appreciate how Kevin starts on time almost every time. So many streamers are unprofessional, inconsiderate to their audiences. Well, you know, I used to participate in another stream, and it was supposed to start at a certain time, but it was all over the place. And the worst was, I planned my day so that I would be ready at this time. And, we started 20 minutes earlier, or 40 minutes early, or 80 minutes early, or whatever. It was hard to deal with. Heck McNeck says, I still need to read North or South. Well, you should. Shiva Naipal's, all of his stuff is great. He's a beautiful writer. In fact, I prefer him to his Nobel Prize winning brother. David Wright says, by the time she's college age, the offer will be long gone or forgotten. What happened to all that celeb money for bail seems misallocated. You're saying that it'd be like Scott's Tots on The Office? I'm sure they have a lot of money for free scholarships. Yes, I prefer my Domino's pizza with Rice Krispies, says Head McNeck, and we'll be getting to them soon enough. Chogokin666 says Domino's is revolting, but good on them. Yeah, I don't know. It's okay, I guess. Ever since I discovered that you can buy frozen pizzas for like $3.50 when they're on sale, I've never felt the need to order out for pizzas. Metal Mike says, I think many people jump on the woke bandwagon because they have a need to be accepted. It adds meaning to their meaningless lives. Well, this is the warning that Christopher Lasch gave as long ago as 1977, that this need to be accepted by the group, the thirst for authenticity, and other qualities he was observing America's youth. The result of child-centered education, he said, resulted in children who one would expect to come from totalitarian societies. Imagine a world wanting to be accepted by a bunch of college kids, says John Miller. Yeah, I don't really know what they learn in college these days. It's not very much, I don't think. I mean, when you have close to half of everybody going to post-secondary education, then obviously the standards are going to have to be reduced tremendously. As Kingsley Amis famously warned, more will mean worse. And so it has. I just plot my way across the ocean. Why delay the inevitable by staying in the USA? I was talking with a friend yesterday, and immigration leads to alienation, often crippling alienation. And there's no way around it. That's my warning to people. William Hicks says, interesting times. These cities, Minneapolis, Atlanta, or Chicago, and their problems with their police departments remind me of Mamet's 1991 film, Homicide. Yeah, that's an excellent film, but it's a strange film because, one is forced to the conclusion that, I don't know, what the last act of it, Bobby Gold and his interactions with this powerful Jewish conspiracy, that this is all going on in Bobby Gold's head, because, he afterwards, when he searches for evidence, there isn't any evidence. And on the face of it, it's absolutely absurd. Similarly with his play, which was turned into a movie, Oleana, I think, again, that we're looking at this woman, from the mind of the professor that she's come into contact with. Because in the beginning, the first half, before she gets woke, she seems just uncommonly stupid. And in the second half, she seems uncommonly sinister. And I really think that we can only accept this if we understand that this is the way that the professor is looking at her. At first, he has little interest in her, so she seems an absolute dullard. And in the second half, he's become completely obsessed with her. So as I said, she becomes completely sinister. The FBI, the FBI, says William Hicks, quoting from Homicide. There's a very nasty word in that movie. I'll warn you that I think it was Joe Mantegna. He refused to say it and held up production. And finally, Ving Rhames, the black actor who plays the killer, he just look, go ahead and say it, okay? Just go ahead and say it. That's so good for Ving Rhames. Contra says, notes for the overlords. I didn't read, but nevertheless disprove and disavow anything possibly controversial in this chat session. It's probably a good idea. Years ago, when I had a blog and I had a blog roll, and someone asked me, how come American Renaissance isn't on the blog roll? And I confessed that it wasn't on the blog roll because I didn't want to get into trouble. Now, that was quite some time ago. That was, 15 years ago or something like that? Let's say my opinions and my praxis have considerably changed since that time. I suppose I had still a kind of vestigial liberalism up to the time of the Trayvon Martin case. That's when I decided that no, I'm not going to hold. I don't hold with any of it, and any sympathy, liberal sympathies in me were purged. Okay, let's. I guess we're going to talk about some purge. No, first of all, I want to talk about this new book by Donald Trump's niece. I haven't read the book. I'm not going to say I disapprove. I'm just going to say I'm fairly confident it's all made up, or there's a handful of truth in there amongst these outrageous accusations. You could lose. You have blown it for us. How Melania Trump raged at Donald after revelation of Pussygate tape, which he took 2 hours to tell her about out of fear. Oh, was she there at the time? This is from, what's the woman's name? Mary Jordan, she styles herself Mary Jordan, PhD, I believe. It's very funny indeed. And Melania Trump's office has blasted the new biography as fiction. Yet another book about Mrs. Trump with false information sources. This book belongs in the fiction genre, says Stephanie Grissom, the First Lady's chief of staff. Now, these books such as these do not get published without sensational revelations. I would have thought that everybody knows that by now, but apparently not. Now, the media, the elite, they never believed that Trump could win. Pussygate was simply the final nail in the coffin as far as they were concerned. It's not as if before this scandal, they thought that he was going to beat Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton was unbeatable by definition because it was her turn. Oh, let's see. Melania has been overheard referring to Ivanka as the princess, Jordan writes. Ivanka, when younger, called Melania the portrait because she spoke as often as one. Yes, stirring up fomenting a cat fight is very good for this kind of book. I quite like Melania Trump because she is not a busybody. Every president's wife since, Gerald Ford has been a busybody. And before that, there was Eleanor Roosevelt, who was busybody in chief over the whole world. Nancy Reagan did not want to be a busybody, and she was occupied with beautifying the White House, and she was bullied into taking up a cause, foster grandkids, I think it was. And of course, George W. Bush's wife, who actually killed a man, she was constantly lecturing us about Afghanistan, as if she knew anything about it, and as if it's her place to lecture people on this subject. Of course, Michelle Obama was appointed the dictator of school lunch. Now, where that's in the Constitution is a mystery to me. Let's see. The Daily Mail has two stories about this book. Mary wrote that her Uncle Donald's election was the worst night of my life. She proclaimed that Trump won because most Americans are hateful, selfish people who care nothing outside of their own narrow interest. Seriously? Americans are famous for their charity. Let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court ruling yesterday on alphabet people. And Justice Alito dissented. He wrote, briefs filed by a wide range of religious groups, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, expressed deep concern that the position now adopted by the court will trigger open conflict with faith-based employment practices of numerous churches, synagogues, mosques, and other religious institutions. They argue that religious organizations need employees who actually live the faith, and that compelling a religious organization to employ individuals whose conduct flouts the tenets of the organization's faith forces the group to communicate an objectionable message. The problem is perhaps most acute when it comes to the employment of teachers. A school's standards for its faculty communicate a particular way of life to its students, and a violation by the faculty of those precepts may undermine the school's moral teaching. Thus, if a religious school teaches that sex outside marriage and sex reassignment procedures are immoral, the message may be lost if the school employs a teacher who is in a same-sex relationship or has undergone or is undergoing sex reassignment. Yet, today's decision may lead to Title VII claims by such teachers and applicants for employment. Well, what they call the gay agenda, it's actually a religion. There's no question about it. And it's worshipped. They have a whole month. They used to have a day, and a week, and then a whole month. And everyone is obliged to employ the rainbow, which was the symbol that God gave to Noah. It's been hijacked by the alphabet people. And clearly, this new religion of gay, it has supplanted the older religions, and we all have to be supportive of this, or proud of it, I suppose. Gay does not mean the same thing as homosexual. Homosexuality is defined by acts. Gayness goes much deeper than that. Apparently, it is entirely immutable. It is something that one is born with. And it doesn't matter whether one has never had a same-sex sexual experience. If you say you're gay, you're gay. It doesn't matter whether you are an obvious heterosexual like Jamila Jamil, who comes out saying that she's queer, and how dare you say that I'm not queer and I'm doing this just for publicity. And, this is supposed to be immutable, and there's rage with the suggestion that people chose this way of life. But if it's so immutable, why do we have so many examples of people, including famous homosexuals, who decided they didn't want to do that anymore and they got married to a person of the same sex? And then there's also the cases of people who, men and women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, or whatever, decide that they are gay. Had they been actively suppressing this their whole life? Are we actually supposed to believe that? But these contradictions in gay theology, this is dangerous speculation. Breaking. Elected officials representing Jewish neighborhoods in Brooklyn are going around from park to park in Brooklyn, breaking open the locks after Bill de Blasio's targeted discriminatory behavior against the Jewish community. Black Lives Matter. Sure, get as many people together as you like. Jewish people can't use your parks. It's an indefensible position. But progressivism is based on a whole series of indefensible positions. Here's from Breitbart. In the ever-expanding cultural revolution spurred on by the Black Lives Matter movement, Kellogg's cereal boxes have now been added to the list of supposedly racist symbols by a disgraced leftist former politician in the UK. Fiona Onasanya, a former Labour Party MP who became only the second person in history to be kicked out of Parliament by their own voters using a recall petition, has called on Kellogg's to justify why Rice Krispies is represented with 3 white boys, while the Cocoa Pops mascot is a monkey. Okay, Cocoa Pops. As you are yet to reply to my email, Cocoa Pops and Rice Krispies have the same composition, except for the fact that Cocoa Pops are brown and chocolate flavored. So I was wondering why Rice Krispies have 3 white boys representing the brand and Cocoa Pops have a monkey, the disgraced former MP wrote on social media. I don't know. People like monkeys. And I guess that's why Cocoa Pops chose one as their mascot. Now, because this is very dangerous, the use of the word monkey or the use of monkey and pictures of monkeys as symbols, very, very dangerous now, because there is a loud group out there who is screaming that this is racist and intolerable, despite the fact, as I say, that people quite like monkeys. 3 white boys, Onasanya referred to in a tweet, are the iconic Snap, Crackle, and Pop, a group of elves invented in the 1930s and named as an onomatopoetic representation of the sound Rice Krispies make when combined with milk. Thank you for that, Breitbart. In December 2018, Ms. Onasanya was expelled from the Labour Party after being convicted of perverting the course of justice. The solicitor was found to have lied about a speeding offense. She became the first MP to be recalled by voters under the constituency petition system, with 27.6% of our constituency petitioning for her removal, well over the 10% required to be ousted. She was also struck off as a solicitor over the lie. At the time, she compared her fall from grace to biblical figures such as Joseph, Moses, Daniel, and even Christ was accused and convicted by the courts of his day, and yet this was not his end, but rather the beginning of the next chapter in his story, she wrote. I'm looking at a picture of this woman, and how someone like that could ever be elected an MP is a mystery. It's a mystery to me. Diane Abbott, I suppose, another example. So, you know the saying, get woke, go broke? Well, you can get woke, and I guess you get, firebombed. Wendy's CEO Todd Penegor issued a memo Sunday to employees and franchisees following the death of Richard Brooks, who was shot by a police officer in Atlanta this weekend. Brooks was killed Friday after being checked for a DUI while at a Wendy's drive-thru. According to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Brooks struggled with police, attempted to run, and was shot. Protesters gathered at that Wendy's following the shooting, and during the protest, someone set fire to the restaurant. The tragic death of Richard Brooks and the pain this has caused saddens us all. Wendy's has proudly served the Atlanta community for decades, and seeing our restaurant burn was difficult, but we are extremely grateful that all of the team members remained safe, Penegor said. Since the fire, a $10,000 reward has been posted for anyone with information on the person who started the fire. Penegor said that the franchise owner is ensuring that employees will continue to be paid and have the option to remain employed at other restaurants. Wendy's is also making funds available through We Care, our employee assistance program, to any restaurant team member in our system who may experience financial loss due to short-term restaurant closures or disruptions. And finally, as we've communicated previously, Wendy's is committed to doing our part to make real change by supporting our employees and the Black community through social justice, youth, and education efforts. Well, that didn't stop their restaurant from being burned to the ground, did it? Oh, let's talk about another weak Irishman. That would be Boston Mayor Marty Walsh, not Martin. That's far too formal. Marty. Sounds like a hell of a guy, doesn't he? This is from Breitbart, Joel Pollack. Marty has come out in favor of removing a statue of Abraham Lincoln that has stood in the city for more than a century, but is opposed to renaming Faneuil Hall, which is named for a slave owner and is on the site of a slave market. Left-wing activists are trying to have a statue of Abraham Lincoln removed from Park Square after nearly 150 years because they find the depiction of an emancipated slave in the sculpture to be offensive. The statue has stood there since 1879 and is a replica of an original statue built with funds contributed by freed slaves. Mayor Walsh's office told the Boston Globe last week that he favors removing the Lincoln statue and replacing it with one that recognizes equality. Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen when these people are acquainted with the rather spicy things that Abraham Lincoln had to say about Black people and their possibilities. It's going to get ugly. Oh, here's a powerful Black man who was reduced to whining. Apparently he was browbeaten by a tiny blonde woman. Michael Strahan has revealed he felt he couldn't speak up or raise his voice with ABC executives for fear as being seen as a threatening Black man. The Good Morning America host shared his concerns during an anti-racism symposium on June 4th in front of all ABC and Disney employees and Bob Iger, executive chairman of the Walt Disney Company. Strahan didn't specifically name Live with Kelly, on which he served as a co-host from 2012 to 2016, but insiders told Page Six that he was referring to the story. This could shed new light on his falling out with co-host Kelly Ripa when he abruptly left the show and moved to Good Morning America full-time. His comments came to light following a bombshell report which claimed that Barbara Fedida, head of ABC News Talent Division, had made racist and sexist remarks about Black journalists. Oh, so a Black mob has got an Arab woman sacked Intersectionality. Don't you just love it? More, please. Michael said there were some very tense situations with executives who got argumentative and loud on Live with Kelly, and he was very aware that he couldn't speak up or raise his voice as he was worried he would be seen as threatening. The company town hall, moderated by Nightline co-anchor Byron Pitts, was called in the wake of George Floyd's death as anti-racism protests roiled the nation. Strahan was joined by several other ABC News journalists of color. Is that what Michael Strahan is? He's a journalist? I thought he was a chat show host. These included senior justice correspondent Pierre Thomas, Eyewitness News anchor Mark Brown, Chicago correspondent Alex Perez, Dallas correspondent Marcus Moore, and Atlanta correspondent Steve Osunsami. For a racist company, ABC certainly seems to have hired a great many people of color to be on air. I've had jobs where I got there and felt like, wow, I didn't know I was supposed to be a sidekick, Strahan said. I thought I was coming here to be a partner. Apparently no one told him anything about show business, or he never watched a movie or TV show about show business, because since Regis left, Kathleen Lee was the star, and she left, and Ripa came in, and Ripa's the star. There's no question about that. I would have thought that Michael Strahan would have understood that. Let's see. Fedita has been placed on leave pending an investigation by ABC News. And there's a whole host of accusations from the Huffington Post, a story written by Yashar Ali. In 2018, Barbara Fedita, a senior ABC News executive in charge of talent, was sitting in a meeting with colleagues discussing fraught contract negotiations with one of ABC's biggest stars, Good Morning America anchor Robin Roberts. Roberts, a black woman and a lesbian, so she's a threefer, who has co-anchored Good Morning America since 2005, wanted more money as part of a contract renewal, and Fedita felt that Roberts had gotten enough. Fedita then asked what more Roberts could want and said it wasn't as if the network was asking Roberts to pick cotton. Oh, dear. According to one source who was in the room and witnessed the exchange, two other sources who were not present but were told about the incident soon afterward confirmed the account to HuffPost. Yeah, sounds legit. That remark is part of a long pattern of insensitive statements, including racist comments made by Fedita to people who report to her. Fedita has been the subject of more than a dozen human resources complaints and was the subject of a human resources investigation in 2016 that led ABC News to hire an executive coach for her. ABC sounds like a pleasant place to work, doesn't it? Fedita, who has worked under two ABC News presidents, Ben Sherwood and now James Goldston, has helped to foster an environment so toxic that several former staffers and talent told HuffPost that when they left the network, they felt that they were leaving an abusive marriage. Working on a live TV show is obviously 5 days a week, obviously exceedingly stressful. Things are said which are later regretted. No, but it's all about blackness. 2 years after Fedita allegedly made the racist comment about Roberts, she remains in power at ABC News, where sources say her alleged misconduct has led the network to spend millions of dollars in confidential settlements with former talent and staff, including at least one settlement related to allegations of racial discrimination. The same thing would have happened regardless of who was in that job. Fedita said in regards to Candace Gibson, who was black and at the time was an ABC News anchor, that ABC spends more on toilet paper than we ever would on him. A source who heard Fedita make the comment. Does that sound like something that anyone would say? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. In a statement from her attorney, Fedita said, "Throughout my career, I've been a champion for increased diversity in network news. That was your first mistake, lady. Building a news division where everyone can thrive has been my life's mission. I am proud of my decades of work of hiring, supporting, and promoting talented journalists of color. And unlike these heartbreaking and incredibly misleading claims about me, that track record is well documented and undeniable." Yes, get woke, get fired. Uh, oh, yeah, this story gets even better. Again, this is from Breitbart, and again from Joel Pollack. News anchor Alex Michelson of Los Angeles' Fox affiliate tweeted Monday that he'd been told by an executive at ABC News that he could not become a network correspondent because ABC News was not hiring white men for the job. Michelson now works as a news anchor for Fox 11, KTTV, and hosts his own weekly statewide program, The Issue Is. He has led coverage of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and riots that have risen across Southern California. He related the story of discrimination in the context of newly emerging allegations about racism at ABC News. And the name of the woman who said that she couldn't hire or wouldn't hire a white male? It's this Fedita lady. How about that, Barbara Fedita? So, I mean, she not only talked the talk, she walked the walk, but it's not going to save her hide. No question about that. Yes. So, the Reverend Darrell Scott is upset that these white Democrats kneeling wearing kente cloths. He calls it a white Wakanda moment. He said that ridiculous display by Congress of putting those kente cloths around their necks and kneeling on the ground, half of them couldn't even get back up. They were pandering so hard. Help, I've pandered and I can't get up. I'm really surprised that they did this because in recent years, wearing the, how would you put it, ethnic garb of a traditional garb of another people is considered to be a grave crime. We are our culture, not a costume. Remember that? Of course, Justin Trudeau and his family got away with it when they went to India for one of these long trips that Canadian politicians routinely make in order to troll for votes in a foreign country. Yes, that's why they go. He and his wife and their children were all dressed like Maharajas, which seemed to me to be a rather gross provocation. But he got away with that, just as he got away with his many instances of blackface. This is a shocking story I'm going to relate to you next. Fashion publicist accuses Anna Wintour of being awful to the Black community while detailing her cold treatment of Vogue's first African-American cover star, Beverly Johnson. Anna Wintour being awful to someone? Well, I never. Johnson, 67, was the first Black model to cover Vogue in 1975. Her former publicist said that Vogue gave him the runaround when he tried to get her invited to the magazine's 100th anniversary party. He claims they only relented once he set up free performances for the party. At the event, he says he tried to introduce Wintour to Johnson, but she snubbed the model. Johnson said her former PR has a great memory and called his recollection a nice story about Wintour. Wintour has issued a public statement after racism accusations from former staffers, including Andre Leon Talley. Who's it? The first time I saw Andrew Leon Talley on television, I thought, is this allowed? This grotesque, over-the-top impersonation of a male homosexual? Boy, someone's going to get fired for that. And then later I found, it wasn't an impersonation. He is really like that. I had a similar experience with Rufus Wainwright. I saw him mincing. This was on Much Music, and he was on the roof of maybe it's Much Music's building, and he was mincing around and speaking in this ridiculously exaggerated way. And again, I thought, oh boy, they're going to get in trouble. These sort of stereotypes, we put that sort of thing behind us. And then I found out that that's actually what Rufus Wainwright is like. It's going to cost him everything. Lance Bass predicts former pal Jax Taylor will be fired by Bravo and claims his business partner is stepping down from their cocktail mixer brand. You read these headlines and you think, You know, like Lisa Simpson once said, I know those words, but this makes no sense. The action followed resurfaced comments from the Vanderpump Rules star. We were talking about Vanderpump. They sacked 4 people for alleged racism. Only one of them was white, and the 3 others were something else. I only know Vanderpump Rules because one of them was in a video by a band I quite like, Poison Arrow by ABC from the 80s. There was a woman dressed like Diana, from Greek antiquity. She was very attractive, but that's all I know about this show. Let's see, Lance Bass. Let's see. However, Taylor's reps denied Bass's comments in a statement to the Daily Mail. The statements from Lance on the podcast today are not only untrue, but also extremely confusing and shocking, to say the least. Jax is still very much a partner and founder of Just Add X and supports the team and the brand wholeheartedly. Last week, the Just Add X website had been hacked, showcasing some hateful slurs, which Jax felt horrible about. In an emotional state, Jax had texted Lance and the Just Add X team offering to step down from the company if that was the direction they wanted to take. Okay. Could we just get a paraphrase of what was supposedly said? Apparently it was Lance Bass's husband, Michael Turkey Turchin, who is responsible for this attempted canceling. Okay. Ashley Martson, seen with husband Jay Smith of 90 Day Fiancé fame, thinks Jack should be fired from Vanderpump Rules. Is there a council of reality show elders? Is that what we've got going on now? NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell is encouraging teams to sign Colin Kaepernick after he was effectively shunned by the league after he began kneeling. A kneeling protest during the 2016 season. Wow. Has anyone ever been out of the game for that long and come back? As mentioned previously, Colin Kaepernick gets a lot of money, and he doesn't get, slammed to the ground every week. The kind of thing that he does now, activism, it's not a contact sport. How do we know that Colin Kaepernick even wants to come back? And you know very well that if he comes back, if he attempts to come back, and he's a bust, the team is going to be blamed for racism, or the league is going to be blamed for racism or some such thing. Yeah, the NFL is determined to alienate its fan base. And in terms of groveling, one of the best recent examples comes from Chief Constable Dave Thompson of the West Midlands Police in Britain. Not David, but Dave. He writes, "These last few weeks have been extraordinary. The death of George Floyd has unleashed a moment of great emotion that has swept the globe and has created a moment of huge turmoil." A moment of huge turmoil. Okay. "It has come as we move from a health emergency into what could easily become an economic tragedy. It already is. Like many people in this country, I've been on a journey ranging from professional analysis, anger, deep distress, and equally huge pride. I feel as a citizen of this country, this city, and your chief constable that I need to speak up. I do this to help us find a way through these coming months." Then he talks about unpleasantness, disgraceful scenes. However, this is not what has made the last few weeks stand out, as they are the acts of a mindless criminal minority. What stands out is the voices of Black people, often young, who have made powerful points about their lived experience of discrimination, about their perspective on our history, and their desire to see change. The huge demonstrations across the country that have been overwhelmingly peaceful, including that one in London where 27 police officers were injured. And any event at which 27 police officers are injured can only be described as a riot. Now, he talks about emotion. I think that he was overwhelmed with emotion or with something else when he wrote The next sentence, which I'm just going to read as is. In my time in policing, I have felt the captive of our history as a service with Black people. What? 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 This goes on. This is like over 1,000 words long. And let's go back to the chat before we talk about the Chop Shop in Seattle. Lexicon of Love is a pop classic, says My Trail of Disgrace. I certainly agree. Little known fact, ABC were socialists, say Metal Mike. Dio is better than ABC, says that wag Jonathan Paul. Metal Mike explains they wrote their songs tongue-in-cheek to highlight the excesses of capitalism and consumerism. They had a great sense of style, you know. James Andrews says you can create multiple YouTube accounts under the one Gmail account, and you can subscribe to Kevin's channel with each of those YT accounts. Just saying. I don't know whether I should have read that or not. Shoot that poison arrow through my heart. Yes, indeed. And Donald Robertson does not like Rufus Wainwright. Michael Walker says Anna Wintour is just mean to everyone. Well, there was a book and a movie where you learned about that. Meryl Streep played a character clearly based on Anna Nuclear Winter. Oh, dear. Hang on just a second here. Let's see if that's any better. Oh, no, we got the film noir effect going on here. Wow. Let's see what happens if I move this over here. No, that's obviously much worse. If I move it over here, this is as far to the right as I can move. Yes, I'm going to have to suspend a blanket or something like that over the window. And it's quite sunny today, and it was mostly overcast. Yesterday, Head McNeck says Tucker, presumably Tucker Carlson, has sold his home in Washington. Last week for him on Fox coming up. That would be a foolish thing for Fox to do, to get rid of him. Of course, you know, he may have got a better offer somewhere else. Okay. Josh Randall, Queens of the Stone Age versus Masters of Reality. I'm not all that familiar with Queens of the Stone Age. Masters of Reality, is that a reference to the Black Sabbath album? Okay. Let's get back to it here. Yeah, so you can talk about the Chop Shop in Seattle. And here's Chris Cuomo interviewing the police chief, Carmen Best, who, despite presiding over a disaster, this seems to become some sort of heroine. I see all these people praising her for her strength. You know, yes, run for your lives, she orders a Seattle police precinct. Wow, that's real strength. On Monday's broadcast of CNN's Cuomo Primetime, Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best, once again, apparently there's problems of systemic racism in the Seattle police. Maybe they could do something bold, like hire a police chief, a black police chief, to deal with this. Oh, they have a black police chief. So why didn't she do something about this? Same as the fellow in Minneapolis. Let's see. Apparently the Chop Shop, barricades around them, prevent us from going in as quickly and as efficiently as we would like to. And certainly because we're not in the precinct, response times across the entire East Precinct area have increased. There's not a no Seattle Police Department response zone, as people have sometimes categorized the Capitol Hill occupied protest area. You know, there is a small area in a section of the city where we're dealing with some occupants and some of the issues there, but Seattle is not under siege, and we are still responding to every single call in every area of the city. When it comes to that particular area, we have, if we get a call, there's an important emergency, a 911 call, we're going in. We're going to do our jobs. Well, apparently the city of Seattle has decided to make the occupation, Chaz, Chop, whatever, they made it official. How about that? This is from the Gateway Pundit. The government of Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin on Tuesday installed concrete barriers on city streets on the boundaries of the area occupied by armed leftists to prevent vehicles from entering. One lane is reported to be left open to allow access by emergency vehicles. Police will not be allowed in except to respond to life-threatening crimes. The concrete barriers are encased in plywood, so occupiers can paint the new barricades with slogans and art. As I mentioned yesterday, the whole place, it looks like an open-air crack house. So there's a several non-defaced surfaces up here, and they have to be defaced as well. You know, this reminds me of children. I suppose I was this way myself. I've seen the evidence of it. You know, when I was given crayons as a small child, I decided that the wall would be an excellent canvas for my art. My parents thought differently and suppressed my early artistic expression. I've heard similar stories from other people who used to be children. Well, Fox News is reporting a deal has been reached between protesters and the city government to reduce the zone to 3 blocks from 6. A local news Q13 Fox report on the installation of the barriers makes no mention of a deal to reduce the size of the occupation. The occupied protest zone in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, known as the CHOP, is getting some extra safety measures from the city. Tuesday morning, the Seattle Department of Transportation added concrete barriers to the edges of the 6x9 block protest zone surrounding the abandoned SPD East Precinct, with a sign that the city could be letting the protesters stay long term. Brandy Cruz, who's a Q13 Fox reporter, tweeted, "The addition of concrete barriers in CHOP this morning is actually very significant for a couple of reasons. This is a clear sign that the city is letting protesters stay long term. They're specifically adding wood around concrete barriers for people to decorate. Barriers help prevent cars from driving into protesters, a very real threat, as we have already seen, while still allowing a lane of travel for emergency responses. This is an important step toward coexistence." Gee, you think they were talking about the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. "And the fact protesters are on board is important. The city is giving them increased safety in exchange for increased access. People live and work in the CHOP zone, and they deserve emergency services." I'll get back to that in just a minute. "The mob that accosted us did not represent or reflect the entire group of protesters. It's not fair to blame that violence on everyone, just like it's not realistic to say everyone has been peaceful." Okay, this is downtown Seattle. On either side of the, both sides of the street of CHOP, there are businesses. How on earth are these businesses managing to stay open? And it's considered acceptable now for buildings to be defaced, and the businesses just have to learn to live with it. Is the city of Seattle going to expect these businesses to pay their property and sales taxes? And if so, why? You may have noticed that. Have you heard anyone else talking about this problem of the businesses that are trapped within CHOP? Now, why would the media leave out a significant fact like that? Well, to ask the question is to answer it. Let's see. Gateway Pundit says the Constitution has been suspended in Chaz or CHOP. Freedom of the press does not apply. Shelby Talbot tweeted, "Wow, Chaz CHOP is really growing. When I arrived just last week, this no-cop co-op was essentially just 1, maybe 2 tents long. Now it goes on forever." Some rules for photographing inside Chaz CHOP for non-black photographers. Before photographing, why are you photographing? For personal gain or to help the movement? If you are profiting off your photos, is a percentage of the profits being allocated towards organizations that are helping the Black Lives Matter movement? Have you educated yourself on systemic racism and your potential contributions to it? During photographing, hang on just a sec. Are you making sure not to infringe on protesters' ability to protest, being mindful not to photograph or film people's faces without consent? Are you prioritizing space for Black photographers to document? Are you making sure to cover the protest as it happens, refraining from omitting or exaggerating parts that may further an inaccurate narrative? Are you showing up to support or showing up for the spectacle? After photographing, before posting and sharing, have you properly protected the protesters' identities by completely blacking out faces, tattoos, and easily identifiable clothing? This applies to both pictures and video documentation. Police have shown out in full force to arrest protesters days, weeks, and months after protests, analyzing footage and photographs to confirm people linked to protest demonstrations. These arrests can be reduced by prioritizing the protection of protester identities. We've already seen that police officers have no problem exaggerating people's part in protests or entirely falsifying encounters. If your work had lacked diversity prior to documenting these protests or highlighting Black pain, what's your plan going forward to diversify your work? Okay. It's a long-known precept of law that one's privacy is greatly reduced in public. You have no right over control of usage of your image if you appear in public. As a rule, the media will obscure the faces of minor children, but everyone else is fair game. You know, what do they have to hide? Well, we know what they have to hide. Yeah, let's see. This is from yesterday. It's the car tender business again. The CHOP civil security confronted a man accused of robbing the car tender business when the man refused to hand over what he allegedly stole. Springer reports the civil security beat him up. Street justice. Yeah. Oh, let's see. We interviewed Sam Zimbabwe, director of the Seattle Traffic, about the new safety measures the city is providing to the CHOP. Peaceful coexistence between the city of Seattle and the People's Vegan Republic of CHOP. Apparently, Chaz's Discord server was breached by Pol, and now the hidden channels where Black Lives Matter members have been gathering are exposed. Let's see. It's some very ugly talk about Jews and slavery. And yes, a whole bunch of funny stuff. How do I become a verified Black person? Yes. John Nolte writes in Breitbart, unless the mayor of Seattle or the governor of Washington request federal help, President Trump should leave the Chaz alone. For those who don't know, Chaz stands for Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, is a 6-block confederacy, a government-free zone. That actually sounds pretty good. An area of downtown Seattle occupied by the left-wing terrorists of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. The police station within the Chaz has been abandoned, border walls have been built, and vigilantes with high-capacity firearms are now the law. There are about 500 residences within this Chaz, 500 people who did not vote to be ruled by this Chaz and its warlords, 500 properties whose values have plummeted, but these are people who almost certainly voted for the Democrats, who are standing by and allowing this Chaz to continue, so ha ha. Apparently there's been a name change. The Chaz is now CHOP. Anyway, who cares? I live in rural America, and as I've said before, out here in Magaland, the collapse of these Democrat-run cities plays out on my 60-inch plasma like a fascinating reality show called Told You So. He still has a plasma TV? Unfortunately, one person who cares is President Trump, who on more than one occasion has announced his attempt to liberate the Chaz from its occupiers, which is a terrible idea. Let's start with the obvious, Ruby Ridge and Waco. Chaz is not a perfect comparison. None of those unforgivable catastrophes of federal law enforcement overreach involved the occupation of someone else's property. That's actually a big difference, but still, federal troops clearing out 6 city blocks of the woke Taliban is exactly what the woke Taliban want. These are domestic terrorists, not criminals. Criminals would flee. Terrorists will want to make a statement, and the arrival of federal troops will certainly result in catastrophe, in martyrs and dead and wounded innocents, in everything being lit on fire. Besides, this is a local problem, a local crime, and I can't even begin to articulate how little I care about what happens in Seattle or in any Democrat-run city. You get what you vote for, and the idiots of Seattle have been voting Democrat by a large margin for decades. In 2017, they made this lunatic Jenny Durkin their mayor, and now the citizens of Seattle are reaping that whirlwind. And that's not Trump's problem. That's not my problem. That's not your problem. Let Seattle voters lie in the bed they made, and anyone who needs me will find me over here eating caramel corn, giggling, and enjoying life. Besides, I want to see exactly how the left's utopia plays out. The filth, the crime, the eventual exhaustion that comes from eating garbage, constantly being on guard against marauders, no privacy, and the suffocating oppression of life in a hyper-politicized commune where the wrong word or expression ensures you are either beaten or forcibly deported. Yeah, you remember that movie, The Truman Show. I didn't like it because it's just too boring. But this is not boring. Chaz or Chop is not boring. I mean, at the very least, you get a helicopter up there. You get a helicopter, and people have been filming inside. You put together like a 1 hour, 60 or 90-minute package every day. I'm sure it would get great ratings because it's all too funny. Okay, I'll go back to the chat, and then I'm going to talk about the Chinese in Canada. Okay. The Truman Show is Kino. Chop is covered in graffiti, but they didn't torch the Seattle Police Department station. I like the plasmas a lot, says Lamprey Milt. Small businesses rarely vote Democrat, says Octopus Knight. I don't know. This is Seattle, and Seattle and Portland are very different than most of America. How does Chaz compare to CNT-ruled Barcelona, says Jonathan Paul. John Reinl asks, did you see that long Tucker rant almost a week ago? I was surprised to see Carlson analogize Trump to Nero. This is spelled Nero as in Robert De Niro. I assume that you're referring to Nero, the Roman emperor. Metal Mike says, Chop is Noam Chomsky's wet dream. He always advocated for libertarian anarchism. Well, no, this is not going to end well. There's no question. It could not possibly end it well. If you've ever dealt with anarchists of any kind, we can't decide anything until everyone agrees. And that takes a long, long time. And then they often change their minds. Octopus Knight says, does anyone else remember the Tim and Eric skit where Eric gets a new best friend named Raz? Bulgent horticulture specialist PhD says, I have a buddy whose apartment is in the Chop and he's trying to get out of his lease. Well, this would be a surefire lease buster, wouldn't it? Because if that isn't, I don't know what would be. I took pictures but checked with an armed guard to make sure he wasn't going to shoot me. Yes, his first comment was, I went up to the Chop last Saturday. It's pretty bad. Head McKeck makes a good point. Charlottesville was mostly peaceful. Indeed it was. Indeed it was. Yes, what are they calling it? Soyatl or Soymalia? I think that the people in Seattle, and the majority of them, would be quite proud of this, actually. Seattle has changed an enormous amount. when I first started going there as a child, it was a working class port city. It was a tough city. The money came from, well, there was Boeing, but the money came from the forest industry and from fishing. But that's Seattle. Well, you can see it reflected in the music. The Seattle music of like the 1950s, the 1960s was absolutely ferocious. Bands like the Sonics and the Wailers. Of course, Jimi Hendrix was from Seattle, and he was tremendously influenced by that raw Seattle style of music. Now they have that Mac fellow. It's all very sad. The Seattle bands, they played Fenders, which was kind of a rebellious thing to do, because back in those days, serious guitarists played Gibson guitars. Kids, amateurs, punks, they played Fenders, but that was the instrument of choice in Seattle, certainly all the way through to Kurt Cobain. We have some good news from my country, and I can hardly believe it, that foreigners have stopped coming to Canada. This is from betterdwelling.com. Canada's immigration has slowed due to the pandemic, at least for a few months. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada data show a steep decline in the number of new permanent residents in April. The drop is one of the sharpest in recent history, with large real estate markets most impacted. Yes, COVID panic seizes Canada, realtors hardest hit. You see, who benefits by higher housing prices? Well, the people who own the homes, they think that a lot of them are going to make a killing on selling them at their inflated values, but then they have the problem of finding somewhere else to live. If you decide to, leave Vancouver, yeah, okay, then I guess you can keep your profits. But if you're going to stay in Vancouver, you're going to lose an awful lot of them. Realtors obviously benefit by higher real estate prices because they work on commission, but municipalities and cities benefit enormously because of property taxes. Property taxes are paid based on assessed value, and when the assessed value goes up dramatically, then the revenues of the municipalities go up radically, which is one of the reasons why the municipalities have become so Bolshevik in recent years, is because they're flush with all of this money. For everyone else, for ordinary people who, maybe want to live in the neighborhood where they grew up, well, that's impossible in Vancouver unless you're rich. Simply impossible. Let's see, I should mention that the Trudeau government has announced that it intends to raise immigration. Yeah, that's right. That's right. After COVID-19 and after the Canadian economy has been probably permanently wrecked, the Canadian government intends to increase immigration to 320,000 a year. That doesn't include everyone else who comes into our country, many of whom never leave. Something like about 950,000 newcomers come to Canada every year, and Canada has a population of only 38 million. The pandemic didn't quite halt new permanent residents, but it came pretty close over the past few months. Canada saw just 4,140 permanent residents admitted in April, down 78% from the month before. This is an 85% decrease compared to the same month last year. The drop over the past few months has put Canada significantly behind its target. And its target is the great replacement. The year-to-date numbers aren't quite as bad, but are down significantly from last year, down 20%. Toronto sees 84% fewer permanent residents in April. And Vancouver sees 91 fewer permanent residents in April. This is excellent, excellent news. Now, a lot of these people who became permanent residents, even citizens in recent years, decide to self-deport to a certain Asian country, then perhaps Vancouver real estate might become affordable again. Let's see, Montreal sees 94% fewer permanent residents in April. Excellent, excellent news. Douglas Todd, who is one of the few reasons why anyone would read the Vancouver Sun, he says, there goes the single pillar holding up a lot of housing forecasts, says Stephen Punwazi. Oh, fun fact. For the last few years, the Vancouver, or the Greater Vancouver housing market, has been propped up by laundered Chinese triad gangster money. How about that? Huh? Now, other China-related, this is very, very interesting. You may have heard me on this show before. Wonder about, just how many fifth columnists there are in Canada. I suspect there's a great many of them occupying high positions in government, media, academia, business, etc. Now, I'm not making any claims or accusations about Francois-Philippe Champagne, but Conservative leader Andrew Scheer called Friday for Foreign Affairs Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne to explain how his 2 mortgages with a Chinese state bank don't compromise his ability to handle Canada's tense relations with the People's Republic. So tense that I just read today that apparently China is claiming that it found insects inside Canadian lumber that had been imported to China, which suggests they are going to ban the importation of Canadian lumber. Those mortgages on 2 properties in Britain. In Britain? He bought before entering politics were fully disclosed when Champagne was elected in 2015 and have no bearing on his ability to do his job, the minister's spokesman responded. In a morning news conference, Scheer said Champagne is Canada's top diplomat and China's communist leaders can use the $1.2 million he owes on 2 London properties to the Bank of China as leverage at a time of strained relations. Owing someone over $1 million, that's pretty big leverage. Oh, yes, again, he disclosed the mortgages to the ethics commissioner. Yes, so what? Why weren't they disclosed to everyone else? The mortgages became a subject of controversy following a report in the Globe and Mail newspaper this week. On Friday, Scheer pointed to the ongoing dispute that has seen 2 Canadian men arbitrarily detained by China since December 2018, and the fact Canada is dependent on Chinese supplies of personal protective equipment for COVID-19. Not to mention that Chinese sources looted all of the PPE in Canada and elsewhere in the world, while denying that COVID-19 was a threat. And Canada sent 16 tons of PPE to China in, when was it, February? Something like that. Sometimes one gets the impression that Canada has become a colony of China, part of its greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Scheer questioned why Champagne's latest disclosure was made on June 4th, 4 days ago. So did the minister disclose both mortgages when he was elected in 2015 or not? The short answer, said Austin, is yes. Again, this is something that, the voters might like to know, the voters of his constituency and the voters in Canada generally. But apparently that sort of thing is not considered important. Another man with ties to China is John Mccallum. And John Mccallum was a kind of a big deal in the Liberal Party for quite a long time. And he's got into trouble with his personal behavior. And he was thought to be finished, I guess. He has a PhD in economics from McGill University. He was born in 1950. And he was the Royal Bank of Canada's chief economist for 6 years. And he was defense minister. He had a variety of portfolios. Let's see. In November 2002, while still serving as defense minister, Mccallum encountered further controversy when officials refused to allow him to board an Air Canada flight because his breath smelled heavily of alcohol. Mccallum announced soon thereafter that the incident prompted him to abstain completely from alcohol consumption. He reportedly also intended to lose weight and give up smoking. He became widely known and criticized in 2002 when he admitted, while serving as the Minister of National Defense, that he had never heard of the 1942 Dieppe raid, a fateful and nationally significant operation for Canadian forces during the Second World War. Ironically, he wrote a letter to the editor of the National Post in response, but committed a further gaffe, confusing Canadian participation in the 1917 Battle of Vimy Ridge in France with Vichy France from 1940 to 1944. Response that the continued historical ignorance prompted outrage and humor among the press. Of course, it's possible, that he was just drunk. But he was immigration minister 2015 to 2017, and after leaving that post, he was named ambassador to China. As it turns out, that his wife, his second wife, I believe, is a Chinese, a woman from Malaysia. And this is from January 2016, 2019. The Canadian press, John Mccallum forced out as Canada's ambassador to China after comments on the Huawei case. Mccallum was quoted in a Vancouver newspaper as saying it would be great for Canada if the United States dropped its extradition request for Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive who was detained in Vancouver. He told Star Metro that if the U.S. and China reach an agreement on Meng's case, the deal should include the release of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, two Canadians currently detained in China, and they are still detained. The comment followed a statement Mccallum issued Thursday saying he misspoke earlier in this week when he discussed Meng's case with a group of Chinese language journalists in Toronto, listing several arguments he thought could help her legal fight against extradition. Mccallum's dismissal was too little too late for Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, who called on Trudeau to fire the ambassador early on Wednesday. Paul Evans, a China expert at the University of British Columbia, said this is the most difficult and emotional moment in Canada-China relations in 30 years since the Tiananmen Square aftermath. Let's see. Mccallum also had strong personal ties to China. His wife has Chinese ethnicity, and his three sons have Chinese spouses, something Mccallum was fond of pointing out. He also had a large Chinese constituency in his former federal riding in Markham, Ontario. This sounds like a honeypot operation, does it not? Now, Matthew Fisher writes, Canadian universities rely on foreign students. What if China called its students home? Oh, please, from your lips to God's ear. There are 140,000 Chinese students in Canada. If China orders them to come home, perhaps because of the detention of Huawei heiress Meng Wanzhou and other perceived slights, the consequences for Canadian higher education could be devastating. This story is just win, win, and then win. Anne Fitzgerald, director of the Basili School of International Affairs, and Dick Fadden, who was once Canada's top spy, believe that Canadian universities are particularly vulnerable if relations between Beijing and Ottawa deteriorate further because the schools have become reliant on China for students and their money. That's a bad position to be in. Are we too dependent? Yes, said Fitzgerald, who returned to Canada last year after a long stint as a senior academic in Britain. Am I still in frame here? Let me check. Position of the sun has shifted. Oh, that's not too bad. Not too bad. And I will go back to this story. Just give me a minute, and I apologize. Is this good for Canada? It is good to have Chinese students in our classrooms, but it is not good to have lower representation of students from other parts of the world. Fadden, who was once Stephen Harper's national security advisor, agreed that universities were particularly exposed because of the amount of money that China was spending on Canadian universities. They pay high fees, so in some cases we are way too dependent. Chinese students spend about $4 billion a year annually in Canada. Of the more than 642,000 foreign students who studied in Canada in 2019, wow, I wouldn't have. So how many university students are there in Canada? Many millions, I guess. 22% came from China. India is home for the largest percentage of 34%. The UBC has for decades been referred to as the University of a Billion Chinese. There are franker and ruder versions of that joke, which I'm sure you can easily make out yourself. And Fitzgerald talks about the networking, informal interactions, and friendships that are formed in Canada. Go with them when foreign students return to their home countries. Yeah. Fitzgerald fears that a withdrawal of Chinese students from Canada might become an existential issue for some Canadian schools, particularly when combined with the severe financial problems they have been facing because of economic fallout from the coronavirus panic. She cited Laurentian University's recent announcement that it faced a shortfall this spring of at least $15 million for the coming fiscal year. The problems of the university in Sudbury were a real warning sign of the financial squeeze that may be looming for other institutions. The issue was dramatically heightened last week when the leading Chinese university recruiter threatened that Beijing might ban 110,000 Chinese students from Canada. Oh, please, God, do so. And the $2.9 billion that they spend at the country's 8 top-ranked universities. The warning came after Prime Minister Scott Morrison led calls for an international investigation into what and when President Xi Jinping's authoritarian regime knew about COVID-19 and whether it shared that information in a timely, responsible way with the world, or sat on the information for several crucial weeks beginning last December. If Australian politicians don't regret and keep being the running dog of the United States in the name of so-called values, Chinese tourists and students will not go there, said Amy Moe, who sends 2,000 university students to Australia every year using stark language straight out of a Cold War textbook. I hope Canada can change its attitude toward China. If a country loves Chinese money but doesn't like Chinese people, China surely is not willing to do business with it. Wow, awfully testy the Chinese have become. Australia has already been reeling from Chinese agricultural sanctions triggered by Morrison's remarks. They were followed by Chinese accusations that its students in Australia were in danger of being violently attacked. Moe added further fuel to the fire by suggesting Chinese tourists, who numbered 1.4 million and spent about 11 billion in Australia in 2018, could be ordered to avoid Australia in the future. Oh, what a shame. What a tremendous shame that would be. I mean, China deciding to withdraw from the world, I think that would be as devastating a cultural blow as the destruction of the library at Alexandria. Just unthinkable. Unthinkable. More on China. This is from the Nikkei Asian Review. China plays hardball on trade as Australian tensions escalate. 100,000 Australian dollars. That's how much Robert Miolini, a farmer in the wheat belt region in the state of Western Australia, lost in future earnings when China announced plans to impose a crippling 80% 5-year tariff on Australian barley last month, citing anti-dumping allegations. The owner of a neighboring farm, who has planted 200 times as much of the crop, could end up losing the property after the aggressive actions by China, which last year bought 9/10 of the barley grown in the wheat belt, a region the size of Bangladesh that surrounds the state capital, Perth. I can't believe that they think the Australian government is subsidizing barley, Miolini told the Nikkei Asian Review. Rhys Turton, president of the West Australian Farmers Association, denounced China's claims as an absolute joke, saying categorically that farmers in Australia don't get subsidies on anything. The real reason behind the tariff, they say, is the push for an independent inquiry into coronavirus. Since then, Beijing has also slapped tariffs and import bans on Australian beef and warned its citizens against traveling to the country, citing incidents of alleged discrimination against Asians. I have an idea here. Again, it's a win-win thing, that the Australian government nationalizes Chinese industries and property in Australia and compensates the farmers and others who have been devastated by Chinese sanctions. You know, Australia got along very well indeed without the involvement of the People's Republic of China, just as Canada got along very well indeed without the involvement of the People's Republic in China. And, you know, here's another benefit of engagement with China. This is from Science magazine. Some 54 scientists have resigned or been fired as a result of an ongoing investigation by the National Institutes of Health into the failure of NIH grantees to disclose financial ties to foreign governments. In 93% of those cases, the hidden funding came from a Chinese institution. Yeah, how about that? In the vast majority of cases, the person being investigated has been an Asian man in his 50s. So, some news from Britain. COVID is effectively over there. The lockdown isn't over. Are British children ever going to go back to school? Because there could be a spike. Oh no, the spike. UK records 233 more COVID-19 victims. An official tally as London becomes the first region in England to see fatalities fall below average and coronavirus death toll plummets to a 10-week low. They got their crisis. They don't want to let go of the crisis. Again, people are going to start asking questions about how this actually became a crisis. And Boris Johnson and the rest of the spineless conservatives don't want those questions. Toby Young in Lockdown Skeptics. Right, this is absolutely incredible. A new law was waived through Parliament late last night, banning gatherings of more than 6 people and empowering the police to impose swingeing fines on anyone breaking this new rule. Officially, this was an amendment to the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England Regulations 2020. The Express says the new law has been introduced in response to the disorder that broke out in Whitehall on Saturday, although it's worth bearing in mind that protests of more than 100 people are already banned. And to date, the only time there's been an attempt to enforce that prohibition has been when anti-lockdown protesters have gathered in large numbers. When it comes to tens of thousands of people thronging the streets to show their support for Black Lives Matter, the government has turned a blind eye. Indeed, many politicians, including Sadiq Khan, he's the mayor of London, have celebrated those protests, and at least one Labour MP has joined in. It's a sign of how resigned we are to the suspension of our liberties that this new prohibition has caused barely a murmur. It sailed through the House of Commons unopposed, with Labour MPs voting for it. Thankfully, there is a sunset clause, meaning it expires 6 months after September 26th. William Hague, who's the former leader of the Conservative Party, he is furious about the lockdown and concludes that they have been a disaster for our society. He wrote, "Instead of having to rely entirely on widely varying mathematical models and fight an unknown virus in a fog of uncertainty, governments can start to see what has actually worked in different places around the world." How about that? He continues, for instance, we can now see that it was not necessary to have a 2-meter separation for people to keep the virus in retreat, where it is already at a low level. We know this from the experience of countries such as Denmark, France, and Germany. We also know that these and other European countries are continuing to make progress without quarantining people entering from low-risk countries nearby. We can also begin to discern the true cost of a national lockdown, not just in economic, but in human terms. The unemployment figures about to be released represent a personal catastrophe for hundreds of thousands of people. Large rounds of corporate redundancies mean worse is to come. For many individuals, lockdown is going to mean depression, family breakdown, and despair. On top of this, we can now be sure that there will be tens of thousands of undetected cancers. Evidence is mounting that domestic abuse is rising and mental health deteriorating. Dental standards will have dropped sharply with lasting consequences. Above all, the education and development of millions of young people has been severely damaged, and they will carry the scars of that for the rest of their long lives. Let's see, 9.1 million workers have now been furloughed with their wages paid by the government's job retention scheme. The total value of the claims is currently £20.8 billion and rising. Okay. Facial recognition software to monitor employees working from home. Yeah, that sounds pretty fiendish. It sounds like something the Chinese communists would do. But this isn't a story about China. If you thought working from home provided you with a bit more flexibility than going into the office every day, think again. PwC, I believe they used to be called PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is a fine name, but now they're Big P, Little W, Big C. I hate this company already. One of the 4 big accountancy firms is rolling out a new facial recognition tool that will allow clients to track employees' absences from their computer screens while they claim to be working from home. According to the Telegraph, it will use employees' webcams to log absences from their desks and force them to give a written explanation for time spent away from their computer screens. We're told that every hour, people who sit at a desk for their living should get up and walk around for 5 minutes at the minimum. Is that a reasonable excuse? It's not just a PCW. The firm is in talks with 4 investment banks and an asset manager over the use of facial recognition technology. The reason apparently is not the fear that people working from home are slacking off, but because of the need to comply with financial regulations. When employees of financial services companies are in the office, they have to comply with various rules, such as not taking their mobile phones onto the trading floor. And PCW and various investment banks are thinking about how these rules could be enforced when people are working from home. Well, I don't think taking your mobile phone onto the trading floor is going to be much of a problem if you're working from home. Someone from PwC said this technology was developed specifically to support the compliance environment required for traders and front office staff. Crucially, it is designed to support those adhering to the regulations while remote working in the least intrusive, pragmatic way. No, okay. These things are always rolled out on this basis. It's only going to apply to this group of people. And then other bosses are going to say, hey, why can't we use that? Huh? Because I think these people at home are slacking off. A lot of time at work in an office is wasted with pointless things, such as meetings. When I was a reporter, we could be in the office as much as we wanted or as little as we wanted, so long as we delivered our stories on time. But I know that for many newspapers, magazines, they require their employees to be in the office for, from 9 to 5 or the equivalent every day. And that's stupid, because reporting, it requires a certain amount of thinking, I suppose if you're, putting on clickbait or whatever, it's not necessary to do much thinking. But, if you're writing for a magazine, it used to be considered a de rigueur that a fair amount of thought would have gone into, a piece in order to make it interesting. I see that Alex Berenson is being screwed by Apple Books. He writes, come on, Apple Books, you are still selling the fake unreported truths alongside the real one. How long does it take? I'm the publisher. You can check the pricing and ISBN number against the Amazon version. Yeah, a lot of fakes. Apple Books, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I will wrap up. What are we at now? I think we're pretty much done. I'll talk about the latest muling from Canada tomorrow. Oh, let's see. At least 20 Indian soldiers were killed in a clash with Chinese forces in Ladakh in the disputed Kashmir region, Indian officials say. China really doesn't care if the whole world hates it, does it? So once more into the chat. You're saying Chaz dead now? Says Octopus Knight. That's quite good. What are Chop's preferred pronouns? Lecomte de Brea says, Antifa have quite a bit of weapons and ammunition. I am impressed. Metal Mike says, remember when Kramer was beaten up for not wearing an AIDS ribbon? That's Chop. Yeah, he did the walk, but he wouldn't wear the ribbon. And there's two amusing, how would I say, sophisticated gay men. One of them was, when he spoke with a Spanish accent, he was always furious about something or other. And of course, they stole Elaine's armoire. You know, they would stop at nothing for art. We have a plasma fan. Someone says Primus sucks. Chad Chadson, our hardworking moderator. I always thought they were kind of a novelty band, Primus. Donald Robertson says the Buzzcocks are one of the few punk bands that I used to listen to. Interestingly, their songwriter, Pete, said that the German band Can was his greatest influence. Specifically, their guitarist. And I can see it, actually. Orkhanbek Sultanov says fembot infested meeting culture. I'm reminded of this former executive with the Disney company, one of the ones who started the DreamWorks company, and he had an excellent idea, which I'm kind of surprised that other people didn't. It was Jeffrey Katzenbach. Katzenbach had a timer, or it could have been a sand timer, and it was 20 minutes. And he would set it at the beginning of a meeting, and after 20 minutes, the meeting was over. Because unless you're getting seriously into logistical matters, and I suppose you have specialists for that, why does any meeting need to go on for more than 20 minutes? I know why, because every woman in the room has to have her say, that she has to speak her opinion, typically several times, varied slightly. That's what's going on there. YT says, I've been in a meeting where we spent 2 hours reading out loud office policies, but the most interesting part was that Black people could barely read, and it was embarrassing. The Lipped One says, love the new living space. When I get my stuff out of storage, I have a large number of framed pictures, and so you'll be able to see some of them as well. MCT says, a lovely show as usual, too kind. And let's see. That's it. Thank you all for listening or watching or both. I greatly appreciate it. I would greatly appreciate it if you like the show or any part of it. You would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so previously. Just a reminder that the recent disruptions with this show are now over. So it's back to the usual schedule with Theater Thursday and the book club on Friday. On Theater Thursday, we're talking about Fassbinder's The Marriage of Maria Brown. And on Friday, we're talking about Philip K. Dick's alternative history classic, The Man in the High Castle. If you would like to support the show, and I would, of course, enormously appreciate such contributions, especially considering my current situation and the upheaval and the move. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. I'll leave you with my, by now, traditional farewell and benediction in these times of social isolation and societal collapse. I do dearly hope that all of my esteemed listeners manage to find some genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Thanks again. Good night.